In this video, we're going to be going over chapter 5 in the text, looking at the idea of planning. In the text, it gets into what we really mean by planning and setting goals and things like this. And so the whole idea behind planning is it's the first part in the entire management process. People have to know where it is that you're trying to go and how you're going to get there. There's several different dimensions and definitions as far as planning is concerned. It could be setting goals, okay, figuring out how you're going to get there. It could be coping with uncertainty. And when you think about a plan, that's basically a document. Planning is the process. The plan is the output from that process. So, for example, you might have a business plan or a business model. The business plan is identifying what are the goals and how we're going to get there. The model is basically the way you're going to go about doing that. Now, a strategy or a strategic plan, strategy is basically a generalized how. Generally, how are you going to achieve the goals that are being set? You're going to be setting some action plans, and things need to be a little bit more long-term as far as strategy is concerned. Strategic management is actually the process as far as how you are setting that strategy, making changes to it, how are you tracking, things like this. Now, planning and strategic management are very important, and the reason is because it provides direction and momentum for everybody in the organization. If people don't know where it is that they're going, how are they going to get there? How do they know to get there? And so you need to make sure that everybody understands what the direction is, what kind of new ideas might come about in order to achieve those goals. And then also, how are we going to sustain a competitive advantage over the competition and in the market? The basic process looks like this. You need to make sure that you're clear as far as what your mission and vision are about. Now, in the book, it talks about assessing the current reality. Actually, what you're doing here is you're actually setting the goals that are going to be set based on where it is you're trying to go. From there, you create your strategies in order to achieve those goals, and you put together your operational and tactical plans. You implement, and then you monitor how well you're doing according to what it is you were trying to do. Now, you need to make sure that you have good direction and momentum, okay? Otherwise, people are just doing day-to-day, putting out fires, and they're just all doing what they've always done. In order to make some real changes and go forward, you need to make sure that you're clear as far as what the goals are, what the strategy is in order to achieve it, so that you have good tactics that you can implement. Strategic innovation is something that Apple has been really good at as far as some of the things that they've done. Who knew that somebody needed a tablet until the iPad came out? Who knew that people needed a simple-to-use cell phone until the iPhone came out? So they've done a really good job as far as strategic innovation. And what you're trying to do with your strategy and planning is put together a sustainable competitive advantage. A competitive advantage is something that you can do better than anybody else. Now, you need to think about this not only from a business standpoint, also from a personal standpoint. When you start thinking about being hired, what do you do better than anybody else? How do you have a competitive advantage over others that may be looking for some of those jobs? And when you're talking about that competitive advantage, you want it sustainable. In other words, it can go for the long term. How are you being responsive to others? What is it that you're doing as far as an organization in innovation and quality? What are you doing as far as being effective in order to apply and deliver on your products and your services? Many times what we do is we start with the mission, vision, and the values. The mission statement is basically, what business are we in? What is it that we're really trying to do? Why are we here? Your vision is basically that look into the future. And the key is to be able to paint the picture in words for the people who are working there so that they know what that future should look and feel like. You also want to make sure that you have your values down. What are the things that we value? How are we going to operate ethically? How are we making sure that everybody is getting what it is that they need? And you need to make sure that you hold people accountable for living those values. When you think about the planning process, you have your mission and vision. What are your values? From there, you start setting your goals, and then you put together your strategies. Now, your strategic planning is going to identify what those goals are and then what are the strategies. What are the basic action plans, the various strategies that need to happen? That actually becomes the goals for the next level down, where the tactical planning is being done. And they start putting together some of those action plans, which then become the goals for the lowest level, the operational planning and the execution, where it is that the rubber actually meets the road. You can see that the senior management are the ones who are doing strategic planning, and it has a tendency to be much more long-term as far as the time frame is concerned. The tactical planning, which is the policies and the plans that are necessary in order to implement those things, are developed by the middle management. The operational planning, in other words, things like the daily build schedule and things like that, are actually putting things into place and getting things done. Your short-term goals, basically less than a year. Okay, what is it we're trying to do this month, sort of thing? What kind of output are we planning? Your long-term goals tend to be much more longer term as far as the strategic goals are concerned. Operational plans are basically taking those targets and goals and putting them together into specific action plans like daily build schedules. What kind of how much do you want to run that day? How many services do we want to provide on a particular day? Things like this. There's all kinds of different plans that are out there also. Standing plans are things that are repeated over time. For example, a budgeting process. A budgeting process is done on a monthly basis and a quarterly basis and things like that. It's a standing plan versus a single-use plan. In other words, okay, we're going to have this one-off thing. We're going to do one thing that we've never done before. What's the plan that goes with that? That one-off thing could be a project. So, for example, maybe you have a big piece of machinery that you need to move from one part of the plant to another. Well, you're going to have a project in order to get that done because you have to identify what's the plans that go along with it, and this is going to be a single-use plan. What kind of equipment are we going to have to use to get that piece of machinery moved? What kind of people are we going to have? Things like that. Policies are general guidelines as far as how things are typically done. Procedures are the specifics as far as what has to happen in order to get something done. For example, when I was at the pharmaceutical company, we had what was called GMPs, Good Manufacturing Practices. In order to produce the product, we had to tell the FDA, here are the steps that's going to go in to making this product. Here's how much time it's going to take. Here's the machinery that's going to be used, this sort of thing. It was all laid out. And that procedure had to be followed explicitly in order to make the product so that it could pass FDA muster. There would be rules that go along with things. So, for example, maybe you had a rule where everybody had to wear hairnets. So there are various things that go into plans and different types of plans. In your planning, you want to make sure that your goals are SMART. SMART is an acronym. In the book, it talks about specific, measurable, attainable, results-oriented, and have target dates. When I think of SMART, I think it's close to that. In other words, it needs to be specific as far as what it is you're trying to accomplish. It needs to be measurable. You know whether you've gotten to it or not. I like to think of aligned, because when you think about goals, they need to cascade down through the organization. So in other words, senior management has a particular goal, which then then put together the plans and things, which then become the goals for the next level down. They put together their plans, which then becomes the goal for the next level down, that sort of thing. It all needs to be aligned. If you're working on something that is not aligned with the strategic goals of the organization, you're working on the wrong stuff. I like to think of realistic as far as the R is concerned. Realistic. because results oriented is going to be covered here as far as the specific and measurable as far as I'm concerned. Realistic means that it's something that can be achieved, but still a stretch. And then I think of timely. In other words, that's still in line with the idea of target dates. In other words, when are you going to get it done? If you don't have a target date for a particular goal, you don't have a goal, you have a wish. So always make sure that your goals are smart, specific, measurable, attainable or aligned, results oriented or realistic, and timely, and have target dates. When you're thinking about goals, you want to make sure that they are a stretch. You may hear stretch goals. The reason is because the more that something is more difficult, the higher the motivation in order to get it done, until it gets to the point where it's probably just going to be impossible to achieve. Then you get no motivation. The higher that difficulty is, the more difficult something is, the more motivating it is in order to get something done. Many organizations, as a part of their performance management process, use MBO, management by objectives. The process, as far as setting those objectives in that performance management process, managers and employees need to sit down together and put together what the objectives are going to be for that employee for that year, for that quarter, whatever it is. Then you put together the action plans to go along with it. In other words, how are we going to get that done? Every once in a while, you step back and periodically review that performance and then do the final performance appraisal, making sure that people understand where they stood and are rewarded for their results. One of the things that I always did as a manager, the periodic review, I always had weekly one-on-ones with the people that reported to me to see how they were doing. Once a quarter, we would do a mock performance review where the employee would fill out the evaluation form and I would fill out the evaluation form, and we would sit down and compare notes to see where it is that we're at and to make sure that everybody knew who was doing what and what their performance levels were. All of that was a part of our MBO process, where we sat down together and put together what the objectives would be and how they would get to it, and then quarterly reviewed what was going on, still weekly to see, just how the daily stuff was going. And then we would do performance appraisals. For MBO to be successful, you need to make sure that top management is committed to it and everybody throughout the organization is committed. Now, this is where I talked earlier, where the goals needed to cascade down through the organization. In other words, the goals that you are working on need to be aligned with everything that the senior management is trying to achieve. That's where that cascading aspect comes down, and you need to make sure that everything is aligned. And deadlines are so important because unless you have a date, there's a great chance that you're not going to achieve the goal. For example, you might have a goal of losing X number of pounds. Well, until you set a date as far as when you want that to happen, chances are it's not going to happen. So it's really important to make sure that when you're setting that goal, you have a deadline date as far as when it's to be completed. And the various planning and control cycle. You make your plan, you execute. And what you do is then you step back and say, okay, how'd we do? Then from there, you figure out what we're going to do differently or the same going forward, and then you make your new plan. So those are some of the key points from the chapter. If you have questions, please give me a call.